Hello again, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video, where we are once again today going to be debunking claims about the ISS being faked. Following my recent video in which I'd photographed the ISS in front of the moon, there were quite a few comments from people still trying to argue that it's fake. Some suggesting that it could merely be a projection rather than a physical object, other people claiming it's nothing more than a plane or a drone. It's actually pretty straightforward to demonstrate that the ISS can't be a plane or a projection simply by looking at the ISS trackers. Oh, if only the ISS couldn't be tracked. I mean, maybe they wish that the ISS was installed with Atlas VPN, because that helps hide your online presence by rerouting your data through one of their many secure servers around the globe. You can make websites think you're viewing from different countries, and you get to pick and choose which country you want people to think you're in, as well as helping protect you with an online tracker blocker and a breach scanner tool as well. Best of all is that with just a single account, you can install Atlas VPN on unlimited devices around the home, whether it's phones, tablets, computers, or even TVs. Sign up today using my link below and you'll not only get a whopping 85% off the regular price, but they'll also include an extra 3 months absolutely free, and all with a full 30-day money-back guarantee if you aren't completely satisfied. Now, there are several ISS trackers around that show where its ground position is going to be, and you can see it follows a distinct wave pattern, which fits perfectly in a steady orbit around a rotating globe. However, for the ISS to follow that track path across a flat Earth requires some very peculiar direction changes and very big increases in speed. Yet the transit times aren't drastically different for viewers in the southern hemisphere versus in the north. Now, when it comes to the idea of the ISS being a projection, the first obvious question is who's projecting it in all these different places around the world? And it must be a man-made projection because it didn't appear in the skies until after 1998 when construction of the ISS began. Secondly, for it to be a projection, it needs a surface to be projected onto. Now, if it's being projected directly onto the sun or the moon, then it would be like sticking a photo to the sun or the moon. It would appear over the same point for everyone at the same time. Yet, if we look at the transits, we can see that they start at different times depending on where you are along the transit corridor. It would also mean anybody who could see that celestial object at that moment would also be able to see the ISS, regardless of where you were located, when in reality, there is only a very narrow corridor for seeing the ISS cross in front of them. For example, here is an upcoming solar transit across Chateaubriand in France. Now, if you are viewing it from up here in this place whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce because I'll screw it up, then you will only see the ISS pass along the top edge of the sun. If you're just south of this roundabout, then you'll see it pass across the middle. And down here in the southern edge of the transit corridor, it will seem to skirt across the bottom of the sun. This is parallax. It's the shift of an object's apparent position relative to the background when viewed from different locations. Such as if you close one eye and hold your thumb up at arm's length and cover an object, when you then switch eyes, you are now viewing it from a different location and your thumb no longer aligns with that object in the background. But if you physically place your thumb on the object and repeat it, then you will no longer see a shift in their relative positions because they're both the same distance away from the observers. The fact that the transits have parallax proves the ISS can't be the same distance away as the sun or the moon, so it can't be a projection on them. But could it be a plane or a drone? No. In Level With Me, Dave Weiss, aka Flat Earth Dave, claims he has spoken to a NASA whistleblower that apparently has disclosed what the ISS actually is.
I've seen the light go from horizon to horizon. There's many problems with that light. First, it's as bright as the sun. It's really bright. How is the ISS reflecting that light as bright as the sun back to me the whole way across? Is it made of mirrors? Is that mirror following me? Right? How would somebody 10 miles away see the same reflection because it can't reflect in all directions?
For starters, if the ISS appears to be as bright as the sun, then it would light up the ground like the sun, which it doesn't. Secondly, the reason that the ISS seems like a bright dot in the sky is because you're viewing it at night when your eyes are adjusted to very low light levels. However, compared to the sun, it's not even close to as bright. For example, the photographs that I took of the ISS were shot at a 1/1600th of a second shutter speed, ISO 3200 sensitivity on a telescope with an aperture of f10. And that gave a pretty clear view of the ISS. Now here is a shot of the sun with the same settings. You can't see anything. To cut out enough light to be able to actually see any detail on the sun, I had to drop the ISO down to 125, which is 4 2/3 stops less light, the aperture down to f22, which is a further 2 1/3 stops less light, the shutter a further 2 1/3 stops on top of that to 1/8000th of a second, and had to screw a 10-stop neutral density filter onto the front of the lens, for a combined total of just over 19 f-stops less light. Each f-stop is half the amount of light. So reducing by 1 f-stop is halving the amount of light that's getting into the camera, 2 stops is a quarter, 3 stops is an eighth, etc, etc, etc. Meaning for the ISS photo, the camera was able to get over 500,000 times more light than it could in the sun photo, and yet it only produced similar exposures. So no, the ISS isn't anywhere near as close to being as bright as the sun. However, his argument then gets even more backwards by saying that the ISS appears too bright to be the space station, but that it is instead a plane covered in LED lights.
I was in communication with a NASA whistleblower, and he says that they have 5 B-2 bombers that they've remodified with some parts of them are transparent material with a thin metal struts that you really can't see. The bottom was overlaid with LEDs to match the color of the sun, and they use them in their base. 2 of them are in Alaska, and I forget where the other ones are, and they take turns doing these flybys.
The ISS is over 300 foot by 240 foot in size. Its solar panels total an area of 27,000 square feet. Now, I don't know if you've ever caught sight of the sun reflecting in a solar panel on the roof of a building, but it's blinding. The ISS's panels are multiple times larger than those. Plus the rest of the hull, which is either metal or covered in light-coloured insulation that reflects light as well. We can see sunlight reflecting off the bottom of 40-foot commercial aircraft that are 50 miles away. So seeing such light from an object that's 40 times larger isn't that difficult to conceive. But let's run with Dave's claims that the ISS is in fact one of 5 planes that NASA uses. Now, he does state that they are B-2 bombers, but then shows photos of a U-2 spy plane and the Proteus tandem winged aircraft. So I suspect he's just misspoke and that it's actually the U-2 he's referring to, because that has a cruising altitude around 50% higher than the B-2, and NASA does operate a variant of the U-2 called the ER-2, which is used for high altitude research. So let's run with the notion that these ER-2s are fitted with a bunch of extra pieces to disguise them as the ISS. Well, the first problem is the aerodynamics of it. The U-2 is designed as a very effective glider to allow it to maintain a very high cruising altitude for long periods of time. The only other aircraft that could operate that high is the SR-71, but that has to rely on raw speed to overcome the lack of air generating lift. Bolting a bunch of extra random pieces to resemble solar panels onto a U-2 would not only increase the weight, but also generate huge amounts of drag which affect its performance. But let's just say that NASA has found some magical way to add all these extra pieces on without impacting on the U-2's speed or endurance. The U-2's operating ceiling is 80,000 feet. However, the viewing corridor for the transit over Chateaubriand, for example, is just under 9 miles wide, for passing across a sun which is half a degree in angular size in the sky. Meaning whatever we are viewing has to be high enough that even at 9 miles apart, it appears to stay within inside a tiny dot in the sky. And 80,000 feet is nowhere near high enough to stay within a half a degree window across 9 miles. We can even use this parallax shift to work out what the altitude of the ISS has to be to move that much between the observers. You have 2 viewers capturing the transit simultaneously so that you can accurately measure the parallax shift between the observers. Then, provided you've measured how far apart the observers are, you can calculate the height of the object. Scott Manley actually has a video where he does exactly this, and he was able to verify that the ISS is in fact 400 kilometers above Earth, which is over 16 times higher than the U-2 can fly. Then we hit the issue of speed. The ISS is visible all over the world and orbits every 90 minutes, which is almost 16 times per day. No aircraft can operate close to the speeds necessary to achieve that orbit time. You can have someone in California view the ISS pass over, and within a few minutes, someone all the way in New York, 2,500 miles away, will also see the ISS. It would take an SR-71 over an hour to cross the US, even at full tilt. If we take a look at an expanded view of the transit across Chateaubriand, the ISS will be seen passing across the Sun for people on the west coast of France at 7 minutes and 26 seconds past 7. People on the Swiss-Liechtenstein border over 500 miles away will then witness the exact same transit a mere 90 seconds later. The cruising speed of the U-2 is only 470 miles an hour, meaning it would take over an hour to cover that ground distance, not a minute and a half. It can't be 5 planes taking it in turns like a relay race, because that wouldn't achieve anything. One plane isn't able to fly fast enough to cover that much ground, so 5 taking it in turns isn't going to help, unless they were to leave huge gaps in the transit path. Well, if that were the case, it would be pretty easy to prove, because people would see the light suddenly switch off as one of the planes ended its stint, and yet people further east would then still be able to see the ISS as the other plane flew over. And the transit finder shows the transits for everywhere on Earth, so anyone, anywhere, can check when they are due to see the ISS and then actually see it right down to the second that the trackers say they should see it. Now, I don't know if Dave has ever been to an airport or an air show, but it's very, very rare that a plane turns up at exactly the second it's supposed to. Yet this idea of the ISS being a plane would require perfect choreographing down to the second for every spot on Earth 24/7 year-round, using planes that can achieve ground speeds multiple times faster than the SR-71 Blackbird and being able to operate multiple times higher than it as well, which sounds suspiciously like the space station. Not to mention the fact that even if NASA had such planes that were taking it in turns, you'd then still have a plane disguised as the ISS that has to take off from somewhere and fly up to the transit route to rendezvous with the plane that's already up there, without anyone actually seeing it. You'd then have 2 ISS-shaped planes together before one begins its descent back down to Earth to land somewhere, again without being seen. It's amazing. We've had reports of people spotting flying saucers in the desert, but in the almost 9,000 days since the construction of the ISS began, nobody has spotted a space station-shaped plane coming into land. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. If you've enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you so much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.